What's up, everybody, and welcome. I'm Biggy Katums from the Digital Denizens, and I bring you the Gamer Stache. Make yourself comfortable, because I got a show for you. Today, I'll be discussing my review of Boneworks today, that released on Steam VR on December 10th, 2019. I believe it's $30 for the base game and an additional $10 for the soundtrack if you're so inclined. I'll be showing off a bit of my playthrough, meanwhile trying not to spoil any of the story. But what do you say? Let's get in there and check it out, shall we? It's time to jump into the MythOS metaverse for the last time. I don't know how they found me, but they found me. They must be monitoring the system. Don't come after me. If you're watching this, it may already be too late. If the system hasn't been shut down before midnight tonight, please find the mainframe and shut it down. Signing off.
Alright, here we go. Diving in.
Operator, attention. Welcome,
Whoa.
Director Ford.
Hello.
First up to bat, story. Boneworks is an open sandbox type gameplay that allows you the freedom of your own destiny. The story of Boneworks is that you play as Arthur Ford, an employee at Monogon Industries, where they are changing the world as we know it in the face of VR technology. Ford learns of a corruption within MythOS and leads to take the charge by going in for what seems to be the last time, which seems rather ominous, I must say. MythOS is the VR world within a game created by Monogon. So Ford goes headlong into the metaverse, but there's no further context of what your ulterior motive is. The story seems it could be easily rooted in much of the same vein as Tron, Half-Life, and maybe even a little Max Payne. That last reference will make sense later. Eventually, you even run into these roly-poly projection-like soldiers that are clearing out anyone in their sight, which is much like the story of Half-Life when they're trying to cover up all the events that are unfolding in front of you. The tutorial is a bit long, but necessary if you want to get a pair of those VR legs, if you know what I mean. The story makes itself present in the beginning and leaves some sprinkles of its story beats throughout the game, but mainly lies within the background, allowing the genius, physics, mechanics, and brute force to take the helm, and it shines through, and it lies to be the main player throughout this VR title. I will say, considering that some are upset that this game isn't the action-adventure VR title that we're clamoring for, I would say that in its defense, I followed this game incredibly close because this is what I was looking for. Stress Level Zero never claimed to be this game, to be a story-focused game. If I remember correctly, they stated throughout their videos on their Node channel that this was an open sandbox type gameplay, where you will be able to do what you wanted to do and how you wanted to do it. They wanted to avoid those scripted moments to allow you to create the memorable moments yourself. When playing scripted games, it seems that most people just have the same experiences in gameplay every time they play through it. Whereas VR games, if they're done properly, they can create experiences that are different than those scripted games. It allows for everyone to have different experiences every time when it engages with you and allows you to manipulate objects and the people in the environment. There is no wrong answer. You create your own adventure. You create your own path. This reminds me much of D&D, or when I was younger we had those create your own adventure books. You're basically doing that, but you're writing your own destiny within a virtual space.
So sick of this. How can I work like this? That's what I think about that, Grandma.
Next up, gameplay. Honestly, I found the gameplay to be quite satisfying, creating many interesting and hilarious moments. I found myself frequently scrambling to grab a magazine from my ammo pouch just to slam it into the gun, reload it, and put a shot between the eyes of one of the headset crabs. Not to be confused with the head crabs from Half-Life, but before it jumps to my head just to immerse me further, yeah, that was just it. That feeling of being scared just before getting attacked or thinking, wait, where's the reload button right about now? But that's the thing, there is no reload button because you are the player who are reloading your weapon by hand. You're picking up the objects, you're wielding melee weapons, and it is you who is actually aiming to take that frantic shot, hoping that your hands aren't shaking too much to make it count. Another instance, at one point I didn't have any weapons to speak of, and one of the headset crabs leapt off the ground towards me, and I grabbed it and proceeded to headbutt the damn thing. And I could just think, what kind of game allows you to do that? Well, I'll tell you. This is the first game that I've ever seen that done, and it felt amazing. Just mind-blowing. Speaking of which, the weapons. This is not only the best looking, but the feeling of holding the weapons is by far the best I've ever experienced within a VR game, hands down. They honestly feel one-to-one, whether you're holding a pistol, rifle, crowbar. The nice thing is, though, is that your hands are not cemented to the handle. You'll notice that your hand moves around slightly as you move and adjust the position of your hands and your arms. Just as an added note, I did try the kickflip challenge with reloading my gun in midair, and I think I was only able to get maybe 2 out of 20 times. I had to try. Can you blame me? I will say no more. Being able to touch things and interact or manipulate things within a virtual space is a special thing. But there begins to be a bit of a hollow feeling when you start playing a game where you can't, and your hands just go through surfaces and objects. This immensely takes away from the immersion and leaves you feeling let down when you can't interact with the environment or the people. It almost makes it impossible to go back to those games where you can't touch everything. VR gaming can feel intense, visceral, and just when you're in the thick of it and you have bullets flying in every direction and you physically duck in behind cover, you instinctively decide to blind fire your weapon over cover or around a corner. And you know what? This creates interesting interactions when, say, for example, you're in a room and the enemies pull their guns on you and you say, fuck it, flip the table over, use it as cover and decimate them with a barrage of bullets, or the holy hand grenade of Antioch. Remember, count to 3, not 5. On the other hand, you could possibly John Wick your way out of the situation headlong, charge the enemy, wrestle the gun out of his hands, shoot him, and then finish the rest off in a ballet of finesse and skill. Okay, I get it. Unfortunately, you can't do all of these things in Boneworks, but I would say you can do most of them. But be patient, we're getting there. The null-bodies. They are these humanoid-like creatures. They look like humans, but they have these weird mesh-like skin over them. And
Get back to work.
I mean, you can go to your heart's content. You can grab a null body by the neck and stab him in the head like you're fucking Rick Grimes and you want to fuck up some walkers. Or if you feel so inclined, I hear your dashing looks make them weak in the knees. You can box the shit out of one and get low and sweep the legs. And just for good measure, give him a nut punch on the way down just to make sure he feels how bad of a day he's really having. But I have one question to ask. Is Boneworks perfect? By any means, no. But is any game perfect, especially right after launch? Rarely this is the case, with a few exceptions. What this game does with the gameplay and the physics, it arguably does it well. The game takes what VR games has been trying to do for a long time, and it steps it to the next level. And yes, it may need some refinement, but then again, so does every other VR title floating about in the void. And you know what? Some of them are even left broken forever, like Fallout 4.
He's not happy.
Believe it or not, within my playthrough, I had some instances where there were some wonky things that happened with the physics, which led me leaving a disastrous trail in my wake.
Buffer.
But at the same time, though, the collision detection was rather hilarious when trying to pick up an object off a shelf, and the next thing I know, it's just falling on me with content strewn about. Needless to say, it needs a bit of work, but that's okay. All in all, though, I would have to say I'm extremely happy to hear that they stated that they're going to be working on this game to fix these types of issues well after launch, especially alongside their new title within the Boneworks universe. I believe it's called Project 4, and I think it's coming sometime next year. In fact, I do believe that as of this video, they have released maybe 1 or 2 patches already. This game may be a bit lacking in the story beats, but for good reason. I believe that Stress Level 0 wants you to create the unique instances within their VR world. Normally within a story-focused game, you would have the story beats pushing you forward towards the endpoint. In this case, I found that the gameplay itself was the major factor in what was pushing me towards the end of that line. So is this the major AAA cinematic adventure VR title everyone was looking for? Probably not. But they never proposed this game to be that, though. Needless to say, this is also not the glorified tech demo that others thought it would be either. Boneworks sits somewhere in the middle. It's a double-edged sword, and if they had focused more on the story, then the gameplay might have suffered. But on the other end of the spectrum, if they had focused solely on the gameplay, then maybe the whole thing would have suffered. Who knows? This game plays well into the balancing act.
Jensen? Is that you? Hold on, Jensen. Stop it. Stop it, Jensen. Would you calm the hell down? Didn't want to have to do this, Jensen. God damn it, Jensen. You're fired.
Next up, graphics. Now, I wouldn't say that this is the most gorgeous VR game that I've ever seen, especially after getting a glimpse at the new Half-Life Alyx coming out in March. But I would say it reminds me much of an updated version of Half-Life 2, which used the Source engine too, but here it utilizes the Unity engine, which I think it does a really great job at it. The guns, on the other hand, you can tell they were highly polished throughout the whole process of the development. And they were really well crafted, designed, curated, and I found myself just staring at them over and over, watching as the light reflects off the polished steel of the rifle or the Glock. Which leads me to believe that just the lighting in this game is incredibly done as well. When it is dark, it is pitch black. There was times I would be walking in the dark and it just leaves you wandering about and you're just hoping you don't fall down a hole and die. When walking through a dark room with a flashlight though, the illumination is quite realistic, even down to the particle effects of dust floating through the stream of light. The shadows also go hand in hand with the amazing light and particle effects within the game. You can see your own shadow, whether you're walking near a wall and you spot it, or you're just being clever and making finger puppet show while shining your flashlight at the wall. Yeah, that's right, they also did that too. It's just, their attention to detail is something else. Even if it's not always plain to see, if you know what to look for, and if you're anything like me, who likes to just pull everything apart and break the game to see its bones work, pun intended, then most likely you'll see what I'm talking about. audio. The audio is superb, from slamming your crowbar against different objects to hear how it sounds, or against a nobody's head for some proper bodily harm. The attention to detail when walking through different areas is quite interesting. I felt for the majority of the overall ambiance combined with the soundtrack, it went from feeling very cyberpunky or even Blade Runner-esque to being creepy and ominous. Which again reminds me of the days of old of Half-Life, walking through those dark corridors and the sewers with just a flashlight and a Glock. I thought it was a nice touch that for an additional $10 you can get the soundtrack. The sounds of the weapons were carefully done throughout the process of the development, and it shows. This goes for when you're swinging for the fences with your trusty baseball bat and you make contact with an enemy, or you're shooting an enemy up close, far away, or in a corridor. The sounds are just, they vary depending on where you're at. And even when you're using the slow motion feature. The first time I was using slow motion and discharging my gun, I heard a faint clanging of the spent shell casings hitting the ground, and I said to myself, wow, that's spectacular. I applaud them for making sure that this was included, because as I stated, the sound quality is just superb, especially when utilizing the over-the-ear speakers when using the Valve Index headset. Physics and design. You can tell that Boneworks is heavily inspired by Half-Life, maybe even a little Max Payne as I mentioned earlier, especially when it comes to his physics. You can see that when you're smashing crates with a sledgehammer, or you're pushing them off an edge of a platform and you just want to splinter into pieces. I spent so much time enamored by staring at my gun while just shooting it blindly into the air, meanwhile holding the slow motion button and then watching as the spent shell casings eject from my gun, allowing them to fall into my hands between my fingers and then clang to the floor. At this point I had come to the realization and distinctly remember shouting out loud, holy shit, now that's what I'm fucking talking about. They fucking did it. Now that's a proper Max Payne nod if I do say so myself. Straight up impressive is what it is. And speaking of which, it's rather impressive that considering stress level 0, they use the Unity engine for graphics, but their physics engine was built from the ground up, in-house. This is the bread and butter that makes Boneworks so great. Now I also wanted to mention that I played this on the Valve Index, and jumping in for the first time testing the finger tracking with the Knuckles controllers, I found myself staring at my hands at multiple points, just pointing at things and making the famous Spider-Man web-slinging gesture, and of course, flipping the bird, because fuck you, that's why. I was just picking up anything and everything in sight, and I distinctly remember walking down this hallway. In the beginning of the game, I believe, it was in the tutorial area, and I was walking down this hallway with a plant in my arms. I made a friend. He was coming on an adventure with me, and as ridiculous as that sounds, I don't care. So then I saw these bolts sitting on a shelf with a wrench. The point that I was getting at, I was actually able to pinch the bolt to pick it up. Which, mind you, this was so mind-blowing at the time because for this instance, I had never been able to do this in a VR game. Astounding. I wanted to refer back to their tutorial. Now, if you take your time with this, you'll get used to the locomotion after a short while, unless you deal with intense motion sickness. The game even hints within the tutorial, if you physically imagine that you're holding the heavy object, you'll have an easier time moving it. So basically, if you remember to act like you're doing what you're doing in the game in real life, then the physics and animation seem to just fall into place. Stress level 0 said it perfectly. We've done 90% of the heavy lifting. Now you could help us out with the last 10%. The other thing I found impressive about this game is that if you think something will work as intended, it most likely will. At one point, I remember picking up one of the headset crabs, trying to leap onto my head and further immerse me into the MythOS. My curious self picking it up and looking into the bottom of it, and I could see the screen inside that says MythOS, and then it got stuck on my head and I tried to kill me. Eventually, I was able to fight it off, pull it off, and then smash it on the ground. It was just, I wasn't expecting it, but just the fact that they put that detail in there, it's wild. The design of everything in this world is just so well curated. It's astounding, and the attention to detail is just so genius, and the fact that it lets you poke and prod around to test the boundaries of what it will allow you to get away with. And that just it reminds me of when I was a child. As many children love to push buttons and test the waters physically and metaphorically, I remember having a Stretch Armstrong figure and pulling him as far as I possibly could until one day he snapped. And he's broken. But that's what this game allows you to do. It allows you to test and break it to the point of its boundaries and then go even further. This game may have not been created for the faint of heart, unfortunately. This seems to be made for the die-hard VR gamers out there. Although even myself, who plays all sorts of VR games almost every day, it still was a bit of a learning curve to get used to the controls, the locomotion, and the physics, and having the full body immersion to manage within the game. I still believe, though, that they should add some of the comfort features within this game, considering that not everybody can play VR games without getting motion sickness. It's a known fact that unfortunately there are people who are extremely sensitive to locomotion without the blinders or the comfort theater. And I mean, honestly, this is similar to making a game and excluding somebody who's handicapped with missing legs. In this case, obviously they can play seated rather than standing, but that's just not fair to everybody not having the chance to even try it and make it work. I think this is incredibly important to try not to exclude any sort of demographic. Now, the controller bindings I feel were well designed, but a couple qualms that I have with them is that there was no option to switch to controls for a lefty configuration without remapping the entire controls within Steam VR settings. And two, the slow motion was defaulted to the A button on the left index controller. Now the issue with that I have is the fact that you can't use the joystick to move and hold the A button for slow motion. So if you say you wanted to run, jump, and come down on an enemy with a melee weapon all in slow motion, you just simply can't do it. So I found that really disappointing, honestly, but I believe I did find a solution. It seems that within the Steam VR button bindings, there was a couple people who had remapped the slow motion button so you didn't have to tap it and hold it. You can just tap it and it would just continue to be in slow motion until you clicked it again to take it out of the slow motion mode. I do have to say though that the menu and inventory system design for the game is rather smart and very well done. If you don't quite care for reaching behind your back for a gun or baseball bat, then this allows you to open your inventory via the menu and you can grab it there. It's projected right in front of you. You can take items in and out of your inventory. Because I found some frustrating moments when not utilizing that inventory mode, where I would reach over to my right side to pull my baseball bat or hatchet away, to put it away, and instead of locking into place, I would just hear it hit the floor. Needless to say, this happened many times, and it's rather frustrating. I do wish that the save system had a bit more frequent checkpoints, but ultimately, it has you replaying a lot of the content for future playthroughs of the campaign in order to unlock new weapons, dev tools, and the arena and free play modes. It only saves when you complete a level, it seems.
Jensen, I told you to sweep.
Now, the physics can be extremely fun, but the puzzles at times were overly frustrating, trying to access certain areas for hidden Boneworks crates or Easter eggs. Collision detection allows for a lot of fun melee, but sometimes you pick up a whole table or shelf when you're trying to grab a weapon or a magazine resting on it. Again, this can lead to you getting your hand stuck through an object, and then the destruction of a small office is imminent in a matter of seconds. This can go one of two ways, hilarious or frustrating, depending on whether you enjoy Fallout 76 or not. You know exactly what I mean. Now, although I must say the physics engine is it's brilliant. They built it alongside the Unity engine, which is very well optimized to the point where you can simulate up to 40 plus enemies within a given space with very little FPS drop. Which I must say, I've never seen this done in a VR game before. And I've tried this within some games, One Dimension, Blade and Sorcery, and I know that's in early access, and they're still optimizing it. But if you get more than 10 enemies on screen at times, it's like a slideshow that even Charlie Chaplin would be disappointed in. So to conclude my review, I'd have to say I thoroughly enjoyed Boneworks, and for what it lacks in story-driven material, it most certainly makes up for in gameplay, replayability, physics, and physics-based fun. Boneworks is, to me, I feel like it's the future of the next generation VR. But it does need some refinement, which can easily be attainable through subsequent updates, patches, and whatnot. Although this can be played on all PC VR and Windows Mixed Reality, it seems that this game is definitely meant to be played on Valve Index with the Knuckles controllers utilizing the full finger tracking. Whether you're a veteran or you haven't played VR games before, I would highly recommend at least giving this game a try, as it has some of the most satisfying gameplay. Also, the story campaign, which reaches upwards to 10 plus hours, all for $30, you just can't beat that. This adds a lot of replayability in the save system, which has you replaying through different levels to unlock further content like weapons, dev tools, arena mode, and the free play mode, not to mention the additional $10 soundtrack, which can be creepy, exhilarating, or just fun to listen to. Honestly, this is the VR game I've been waiting for quite a long time. I left this game playing with many memorable moments that it kept me wondering, what else did they cram into this game? What else can I find that will just astound me? Alright. Woo! That was a close one. Almost didn't make it out of MythOS alive. But you know what? I'm thankful that you guys stopped by here, and I really hope you enjoyed the review. Please post any comments below. Let me know what you guys think. Any advice is really appreciated. And you know what? If you guys are interested, we also have a podcast that we record on Anchor.fm. It's also broadcasted to Spotify and I believe Apple Podcasts. And you can follow us on Instagram. So I'll post that stuff in the link below. And you know what to do. Slam a like, hit that bell, keep your ear to the ground for more to come. Thanks.